I need you tonight. From husband's coworker appeared on his phone while he was showering last Tuesday. So I texted back as him, come over at 8, wife's at her mom's, and gave her our address. I made his favorite lasagna, set the table for 3, and waited in my nicest dress while he sat confused asking why I was being so fancy. When the doorbell rang at 8:02 p.m. and I opened it to find Jessica from accounting, holding a bottle of wine and wearing lingerie under her coat, her face went white as she saw me standing there smiling. I handed her a plate, said, "Dinner's ready. Why don't you explain to my husband why you're here?" And watched them both stumble over their words while I calmly ate my lasagna. I'm Charlotte Bennett, 34 years old, and that Tuesday evening marked the end of my marriage and the beginning of something far more satisfying than revenge. The look on Jessica's face when she realized she'd walked straight into her own trap was worth every ounce of humiliation she and my husband had planned to inflict on me. The bottle of wine slipped from her fingers, shattering across our hardwood entryway, red liquid spreading like guilt across the floor. My husband Michael sat frozen at our dining table, his fork suspended midway to his mouth, his eyes darting between me and Jessica like a cornered animal searching for escape. This isn't, Jessica stammered, her hands clutching her coat closed, but not before I'd seen the black lace bodysuit underneath. Charlotte, I can explain. I took another deliberate bite of lasagna, savoring both the rich flavors and the panic radiating from them both. Please do explain, Jessica. I'm fascinated to hear why my husband's coworker would show up at our home wearing lingerie after receiving a text inviting her over while I was supposedly at my mother's house. I turned to Michael, whose face had gone from confused to ashen in approximately 3 seconds. Although maybe Michael would like to start. Darling, did you text Jessica tonight? The beauty of the moment wasn't just catching them. It was watching them realize I'd orchestrated this entire confrontation with surgical precision. Michael's phone had been an open book to me for months. The Find My iPhone feature he thought he'd disabled, still active on my tablet. The deleted messages he assumed were gone forever, automatically backed up to a cloud account he didn't know existed. Every late night, work meeting, every business trip to conferences that didn't exist, every lie carefully documented and stored. You went through my phone, Michael finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I did. Extensively. I set down my fork with deliberate calm. But let's not deflect, Michael. We have a guest who's clearly expected something different this evening. Jessica, that wine you brought, is it the same Merlot you two shared at the Riverside Hotel 3 weeks ago? Room 412, if I remember the receipt correctly. Jessica's coat fell open completely now, revealing the full extent of her planned seduction. She looked at Michael with betrayal in her eyes, as if he'd somehow set her up, not understanding yet that I'd been the puppet master all along. You said she didn't know. You said you were going to leave her. How touching, I said, standing now and walking to our bar cart. I poured myself a generous glass of whiskey, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Michael's been about to leave me for what, honey? 6 months now? That's how long I've known about your affair. 6 months of watching you lie to my face while you planned your future with someone who can't even recognize a setup when she walks into one. The power in that moment was intoxicating. Not the power of anger or hurt, but the power of having controlled this narrative from the shadows while they believed themselves so clever. Michael and Jessica had underestimated me completely, seen me as the obstacle between them and their happiness rather than the architect of their downfall. They'd mistaken my silence for ignorance, my calm demeanor for obliviousness. They had no idea that while they were planning their secret rendezvous, I was planning something far more permanent. Before that Tuesday, I'd been Charlotte Bennett, devoted wife and successful architectural photographer, married for 9 years to a man I'd met in college. We'd built what I thought was a solid life together, our 4-bedroom colonial in an upscale Chicago suburb, comfortable routines, shared friends, plans for children we'd been not quite ready for, but would definitely have soon. I'd supported Michael through his MBA, celebrated his promotions, hosted dinner parties for his colleagues, and believed in the version of our marriage he showed the world. The truth had revealed itself 6 months earlier in the most mundane way possible. Michael's phone had buzzed during dinner while he was in the bathroom, and I'd glanced at it casually, expecting a work email or message from his mother. Instead, I'd seen Jessica's name with a message that made my blood run cold. Missing you already. Can still feel your hands on me. That single message had shattered my entire understanding of my life. The first 48 hours after that discovery were a blur of nausea, tears, and disbelief. I'd wanted to confront him immediately, to scream and demand explanations. But something had stopped me, a voice of self-preservation that whispered, "Wait. Gather information. Understand the full scope before you act." That instinct had saved me from making the mistake of confronting Michael while he still had time to spin narratives, hide evidence, or manipulate me into believing his version of events. So instead of confrontation, I'd become a detective in my own home. I'd installed monitoring software on our shared tablet that mirrored his phone activity. I'd created a hidden folder on my laptop where I methodically saved screenshots, call logs, credit card statements, and hotel receipts. What I'd discovered went far beyond a simple affair. Michael hadn't just been cheating, he'd been building an entire alternate life, discussing divorce timelines with Jessica, planning how to minimize his financial obligations to me, even touring apartments for their future together. The documentation had been thorough and damning. Late-night video calls that Jessica termed their virtual dates. Text exchanges where Michael complained about me being frigid and controlling, lies that rewrote our history to paint himself as trapped. Financial transfers to a secret savings account he'd opened 3 years ago, long before Jessica entered the picture, suggesting this wasn't his first affair. The pattern showed a man who'd been planning his exit for years, just waiting for the right moment and the right replacement wife. But what had struck me most deeply wasn't just the betrayal, it was the contempt. In their messages, I wasn't Charlotte the person. I was the wife, an obstacle to be managed and eventually discarded. They'd joked about my photography career as her little hobby, mocked the way I organized our home, and laughed about how clueless I was to what was happening under my nose. Jessica had even sent Michael screenshots of my Instagram, critiquing my appearance and speculating about whether I'd let myself go after marriage. That contempt had transformed my hurt into something colder and more focused. They wanted to see me as the pathetic, oblivious wife. I'd give them exactly that performance right up until the moment I revealed that I'd been 3 steps ahead the entire time. And as Jessica stood in my entryway that Tuesday night, her planned seduction turned into public humiliation. I felt the first real satisfaction I'd experienced in months. Now, standing in my living room with Jessica's wine staining my floor and Michael's lies crumbling around him, I was ready to deploy the rest of my carefully constructed plan. The dinner invitation had been just the opening move in a much longer game. "Sit down, Jessica," I said, gesturing to the third-place setting I'd prepared. "If you're going to be part of destroying my marriage, the least you can do is have the courage to sit through dinner and explain yourself." Jessica remained frozen in the doorway, her coat still hanging open, mascara beginning to streak as tears formed. Michael had finally moved, standing now with his hands raised in that universal gesture of surrender that guilty people always make when cornered. "Charlotte, please, let me explain," he started, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "You'll both get your chance to explain. After we eat. I didn't spend 3 hours making your favorite lasagna for it to go cold." The normalcy of my tone seemed to unsettle them more than shouting would have. I returned to my seat and picked up my fork. "Jessica, you're letting the cold air in. Close the door, hang up your coat, and sit down." The absurdity of the situation seemed to break through Jessica's shock. She looked at Michael desperately, but he offered no guidance, no rescue. Finally, she stepped inside, closed the door, and with trembling hands removed her coat. Underneath, the black lace bodysuit she'd worn for my husband gleamed in our dining room lights. She draped the coat over a chair and sat down across from me, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "I notice you're not covering up," I observed calmly. "Did you think Michael would appreciate the effort, or were you hoping to make me feel inadequate by comparison?" I took a sip of whiskey. "For the record, I bought lingerie just like that for our anniversary 2 years ago. Michael told me it looked trashy. Interesting that his tastes have evolved." Michael finally found his voice, though it came out strangled. "How long have you known?" 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, I replied, serving myself another portion of lasagna as if we were having a pleasant dinner conversation. "Since the night Jessica sent you that message about still feeling your hands on her. March 15th. You'd told me you were at a conference in Milwaukee. You were actually at the Riverside Hotel downtown, room 412. You ordered room service, the filet mignon, charged it to the credit card you think I don't know about. Jessica's face went from pale to green. You've known for 6 months and didn't say anything? Why would I? You two were doing such an excellent job of documenting everything yourselves. The text messages alone could fill a novel. My personal favorite was when you discussed how to handle Charlotte during the divorce. Such touching concern for my well-being. I leaned forward, my pleasant tone never wavering. Did you really think Michael was going to leave his wife for you, Jessica? A man who's been cheating on me for at least 3 years based on that secret bank account he started? You're not special, sweetheart. You're just convenient. 3 years? Jessica turned to Michael, betrayal evident in her voice. You told me I was the first. You said your marriage had been dead for years, but you'd never acted on it until you met me. Oh, that's precious. I laughed, the sound bitter. Michael, did you use the same line on Jessica that you used on whoever came before her? Because I found some interesting hotel receipts going back to 2021. Different names, different rooms, same pattern. Michael's face had gone crimson. You had no right to go through my things. That's a violation of privacy. The audacity of his statement almost made me laugh. I had no right? I'm your wife. We have joint accounts, joint assets, a joint life that you've been systematically dismantling while lying to my face every single day. But please, tell me more about violations of privacy while your mistress sits at our dinner table in lingerie. Jessica was crying openly now, mascara tracking down her face in dark rivers. He said you didn't sleep in the same bed anymore. He said you were basically roommates. We had sex 4 days ago, Jessica. Sunday morning, actually. Was that before or after your little breakfast date at Morton's? I pulled out my phone and opened my photo gallery, turning it to show them both. I've documented everything. Every lie, every receipt, every message. I have GPS data from Michael's phone showing every hotel visit. I have video of you two at restaurants all over the city. I even have, I paused for effect, recordings of phone calls where you discussed the best strategy for Michael to minimize what I'd get in a divorce. The color drained from Michael's face completely. You recorded us? That's illegal. Actually, in Illinois, it's perfectly legal to record conversations that take place in your own home, especially on devices you own. And that tablet you use for video calls with Jessica, the one you think is secure, registered in my name, connected to my Apple ID. I watched understanding dawn in his eyes. Every single video call you two had, every whispered conversation about your future together, all of it backed up to my cloud storage. Jessica stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. I need to leave. Sit down, I said, and something in my voice made her obey. You came here tonight expecting to sleep with my husband, to celebrate another successful deception. You don't get to run away now that you've realized you walked into a trap. You wanted to be part of this marriage's destruction? Then you get to sit through what comes next. Michael's hands were shaking as he reached for his water glass. What do you want, Charlotte? Money? I'll give you whatever you want in the divorce. Just stop this. Oh, we're far past talking about divorce settlements, Michael. I stood and walked to my briefcase, which I'd deliberately placed on the sideboard earlier. See, while you two were planning your future, I was planning mine. And unlike your amateur attempts at deception, I actually know what I'm doing. I pulled out a thick folder and set it on the table between them. This is a complete dossier of your affair. Every message, every photo, every financial transaction. But more importantly, I pulled out a second folder. This is documentation of something much more interesting. Tell me, Michael, does your company have a fraternization policy? His face went white. You wouldn't. Oh, but I already did. I sent a comprehensive report to your HR department this afternoon, complete with evidence that you, as Jessica's direct supervisor, have been conducting an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. That you've given her preferential treatment in assignments, approved questionable expense reports, and, I pulled out specific pages, provided her with confidential information about other employees' salaries that she used to negotiate her own raise. Jessica's hands flew to her mouth. No, you can't. I'll lose my job. You're both going to lose your jobs, I corrected. The email is scheduled to send to the CEO, the board of directors, and your entire department first thing Monday morning. Unless, I paused, letting the word hang in the air. Unless what? Michael asked desperately. Unless you both do exactly what I tell you to do. I sat back down, crossed my legs, and smiled. You wanted to plan my future without my input? Now I'm going to plan yours. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. They were no longer the clever conspirators and I the foolish wife. They were trapped animals, and I was the one holding all the cards. What they didn't know yet was that the HR report was just the beginning. I'd spent 6 months preparing for this moment, and I had moves planned that would leave them both devastated in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Here's what's going to happen, I began, my voice steady and cold. Michael, tomorrow morning you're going to transfer $200 from that secret account you've been building into my personal account. The one you've been hiding? I've known about it since month 2 of this investigation. That money represents half of what you've siphoned from our joint accounts over the years, plus interest. I don't have $200,000 in that account, Michael protested. You have $247,000 as of yesterday. I've been monitoring it. $200,000 to me, and you keep the rest. Consider it a bargain compared to what a judge would award me. I turned to Jessica. And you, dear Jessica, are going to write a detailed confession about the affair, including the preferential treatment Michael gave you at work. You'll submit your resignation, effective immediately, and you'll recommend that the company investigate Michael's conduct. Why would I do that? Jessica's voice was defiant despite her tears. Because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone in your professional network knows exactly what kind of person you are. I'll send copies of your messages, your photos, everything to every contact in your LinkedIn, your parents, your friends, your college alumni group. I'll make sure that when anyone Googles your name, the first thing they find is a detailed account of how you systematically pursued a married man and helped him steal from his wife. That's blackmail, Michael said. No, that's consequences. Blackmail would be if I were asking for something illegal. I'm simply offering you a choice. Cooperate and minimize the damage, or refuse and watch me burn your lives to the ground with information you voluntarily provided through your own carelessness. Jessica was sobbing now, her carefully applied makeup completely destroyed. I thought he loved me. I thought we were going to be together. He doesn't love you, Jessica. He loves the idea of you, the excitement of sneaking around. Michael's never been faithful to anyone, including you. There are at least 2 other women he's been messaging in the past 6 months alone. Did you really think you were special? I pulled out my phone again and showed her screenshots. Melissa from his gym, Rachel from his client's office. Should I go on? Jessica turned to Michael, horror and betrayal mixing on her face. Is that true? Michael's silence was answer enough. Jessica stood, grabbed her coat, and rushed toward the door. Remember our agreement, Jessica, I called after her. Resignation letter and confession by Monday morning, or I start making calls. The door slammed behind her, leaving Michael and me alone in the wreckage of our dinner party. He sat at the table, his head in his hands, everything he'd worked to build crumbling around him. How could you do this? He asked, his voice broken. How could I? How could you, Michael? 9 years of marriage, 9 years of me supporting you, believing in you, defending you when my friends said you were too ambitious, too selfish. I gave up job opportunities to follow your career. I postponed my dreams of children because you weren't ready. I made this house a home while you were out there treating me like I was disposable. I never meant for it to go this far, he said weakly. But it did. And now you're going to face the consequences. I stood and gathered my briefcase. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. Tomorrow, you'll make that transfer. Monday, you'll meet with a divorce attorney I've already retained. The papers are being filed next week. You'll agree to my terms, which are generous considering what I could take you for, or I'll make sure every detail of your affairs becomes public record. Where does this leave us? He asked, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Us? There is no us anymore, Michael. There hasn't been for a long time. I just didn't realize it until you forced me to see the truth. You wanted to leave me for someone else? Congratulations. You're about to be single, unemployed, and significantly poorer. I hope it was worth it. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Michael? That lasagna you're eating? I made it with ingredients I bought using your secret credit card. Seemed fitting that your affair should at least buy me one last meal in my own home. I left him sitting at our table, surrounded by the ruins of his lies, and walked out into the cool evening air, feeling lighter than I had in months. This was just the beginning. The hotel room I'd booked for that night was at the Four Seasons, an indulgence I'd charged to Michael's secret credit card that he still believed was hidden from me. After 6 months of careful planning, I'd earned one night of luxury at his expense. I ordered room service, took a long bath in the marble tub, and finally allowed myself to feel the emotions I'd been suppressing since discovering the affair. But I didn't cry. The tears had dried up somewhere around month 3 of my investigation, replaced by cold determination. What I felt now was anticipation. Everything was falling into place exactly as I'd planned, but the real satisfaction was still to come. Saturday morning arrived with my phone buzzing at precisely 7 a.m. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "The money's been transferred," he said without preamble, his voice hoarse from what had probably been a sleepless night. "All of it. Can you please cancel that email to HR?" "I'll consider it," I replied, stretching luxuriously in the hotel's Egyptian cotton sheets. "After I verify the transfer and receive Jessica's resignation letter. Has she sent it yet? How would I know? I'm not speaking to her, really? According to the GPS data I'm still monitoring from your phone, you drove to her apartment at 3:00 a.m. and stayed for 47 minutes. What were you doing there, Michael? Comforting her? Or trying to coordinate your stories?" The silence on the other end told me I'd hit the mark. "You're still tracking me? Did you really think I'd stop just because you got caught? I'm tracking you until the divorce is finalized and you're completely out of my life. Every move, every call, every text. So I'd suggest you be very careful about what you do next." I could hear him breathing heavily, anger and frustration evident even through the phone. "What do you want from me, Charlotte? You've got your money, you've destroyed my relationship with Jessica, you're taking everything. What more could you possibly want? I want you to understand what it feels like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. I want you to experience the humiliation of having your private life exposed. I want you to lose everything you thought made you special." I paused, letting my words sink in. "And we're just getting started." Before he could respond, I hung up and opened my banking app. Sure enough, $200, $1,000 had been transferred into my account at 6:47 a.m. Michael had moved quickly, probably hoping that compliance would earn him mercy. He had no idea that mercy was the last thing on my agenda. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email from Jessica. The resignation letter was brief and professional, no mention of the affair, just a standard 2 weeks notice citing personal reasons for her departure. Attached was a second document, the confession I'd demanded, detailing the inappropriate relationship and the preferential treatment she'd received. I forwarded both documents to my personal attorney, Rebecca Ashford, who I'd retained 3 months ago specifically for this situation. Rebecca was a shark in designer suits, known for her ruthless efficiency in divorce cases. She'd been preparing our filing for weeks, waiting for my signal to proceed. Her response came within minutes. "Perfect. Filing Monday as planned. The confession gives us leverage if he tries to hide additional assets. Well played." With the money secured and Jessica's cooperation confirmed, I allowed myself a small smile. Phase 1, complete. But I'd spent 6 months preparing multiple phases, each designed to dismantle Michael's life piece by piece. He thought losing his relationship with Jessica and paying me $200,000 was the worst of it. He had no idea what was coming. By noon, I'd checked out of the hotel and driven to a storage unit I'd rented under my maiden name 4 months earlier. Inside were boxes of belongings I'd slowly moved from our house. Items Michael had never noticed were missing. My grandmother's jewelry, first editions of books I'd collected, photographs from before our marriage, documents establishing my separate identity. I'd been preparing my escape route while he'd been planning his. I spent Sunday at my actual mother's house, a detail that made the previous night's deception even more satisfying. My mother had known about Michael's affair for 4 months, one of the few people I'd trusted with the truth. She'd wanted me to confront him immediately, but I'd convinced her that patience would yield better results. "I still can't believe you invited that woman to your house," my mother said as we sat in her garden drinking coffee. "What if Michael had become violent?" I had Tyler waiting in his car 3 houses down, I explained. Tyler was my younger brother, a former Marine who'd been more than happy to serve as backup. If anything had gone wrong, he'd have been there in 30 seconds. But I knew Michael wouldn't get physical. He's a coward at heart. Cowards don't fight. They run. What happens now? She asked. Now I dismantle everything he's built. I pulled out my tablet and showed her the detailed timeline I'd created. Monday, the divorce papers get filed. Jessica's resignation hits his company. Tuesday, I have a lunch meeting with 3 of his biggest clients, all women who I've gotten to know through company events. I'm going to tell them exactly why I'm divorcing Michael, with documentation. My mother's eyes widened. Won't that hurt his business? That's the point. Michael's clients trust him because they trust us, the image of the stable, successful couple. Once they know what he's really like, how he treats the women in his life, they'll drop him faster than he can say billable hours. I've already sent them each a preliminary email, just saying I need to discuss something important about Michael's character. All 3 agreed to meet me. And his job? That's phase 3. I've been documenting not just the affair, but multiple policy violations. The preferential treatment for Jessica, the falsified expense reports, the confidential information he shared. His company has a zero-tolerance policy for fraternization between supervisors and subordinates. Even if they don't fire him immediately, his career there is over. No more promotions, no more bonuses, just marking time until they can legally push him out. My mother looked at me with an expression mixing pride and concern. You've become someone I don't entirely recognize, someone harder. I've become someone who doesn't accept betrayal quietly, someone who fights back instead of just crying in the corner. I met her eyes steadily. Is that such a bad thing? No, she said slowly, but make sure you don't lose yourself in the revenge. Don't let what he did turn you into something you're not. I appreciated her concern, but she didn't understand. I wasn't becoming something I wasn't. I was becoming something I'd always had the potential to be, but had suppressed for the sake of being a good wife. The Charlotte who'd discovered that text message 6 months ago would have confronted Michael immediately, probably would have taken him back after he swore it was a mistake, and promised to change. The Charlotte who'd emerged from 6 months of methodical planning was someone who understood that some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness, they deserve consequences. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. I dressed in my best suit, armor for the war I was about to wage, and drove to Rebecca's office downtown. The divorce papers were ready, thoroughly detailing not just grounds for divorce, but a comprehensive asset division that would leave Michael with significantly less than he'd planned to keep. We're asking for the house, Rebecca explained as we reviewed the documents. Given his infidelity and the duration of the marriage, you have a strong claim. We're also requesting spousal support for 3 years while you rebuild your photography business to the level it would have reached without you sacrificing opportunities for his career. What about his retirement accounts? 50% of everything accumulated during the marriage. His lawyer will fight it, but Illinois is an equitable distribution state, and you have documentation showing your contributions to his career success. Rebecca smiled like a predator. I've also included a clause that if he contests the division, you reserve the right to introduce evidence of his affairs into public record. Most men don't want their sexual history discussed in open court. The papers were filed at 9 a.m. By 9:30, Michael's phone had exploded with calls from his attorney. At 10 kilo, according to the GPS I was still monitoring, he left his office and drove to a bar, where he remained until 2:00 p.m. Drowning his sorrows wasn't going to help him, but I appreciated that he was already falling apart. My lunch meetings with Michael's clients went exactly as planned. I met with Patricia Morrison first, the CEO of a mid-sized healthcare company that represented 15% of Michael's annual billings. I'd gotten to know Patricia over the past 3 years through various company dinners and charity events. She'd always struck me as someone who valued integrity. I wanted you to hear this from me directly, I told her over salads at her favorite restaurant. I'm divorcing Michael. He's been having an affair with a subordinate at his company, and I have reason to believe it's affected his professional judgment. I showed her selected excerpts from the messages, the ones discussing how Michael had manipulated expense reports and client billings to create more time for his affair. Patricia's face hardened as she read. Is this information verified? Completely. I have 6 months of documentation. I'm not asking you to take any action. I just thought you should know the character of the man handling your company's legal affairs. I appreciate your candor, Patricia said, closing the folder. And I'm sorry you're going through this. For what it's worth, you deserve better. She paused. I'll need to discuss this with my board, but I suspect we'll be seeking new counsel. The meetings with Michael's other two major clients went similarly. By 5 p.m., I'd effectively cost him approximately 40% of his client base. They'd need time to transition to new attorneys, but the writing was on the wall. Michael's career was imploding. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered, "You vindictive bitch." It was Jessica, her voice raw with tears and fury. I lost my job. They fired me on the spot after reading my confession. No severance, no references, nothing. My career is destroyed. You destroyed it yourself when you decided to sleep with your married supervisor, I replied calmly. I simply made sure the consequences caught up with you. We were in love. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You wanted what you thought I had, the successful husband, the nice house, the comfortable life. You convinced yourself that your feelings justified destroying someone else's marriage. But here's what you didn't understand, Jessica. The life you wanted? It was built on my sacrifices. Every success Michael had, I was behind it. Every promotion, every big case, I was the one holding our life together while he focused on his career. You wanted the results without putting in any of the work. He said you were cold, that you didn't understand him. He lied to you just like he lied to me. The difference is, I stopped believing his lies 6 months ago. You kept believing until the evidence was literally standing in front of you in a fancy dress holding a folder of proof. I paused. How long did it take after I caught you before you realized he'd been seeing other women besides you? Her sharp intake of breath told me she'd figured it out. You knew about the others? Of course I knew. I know everything, Jessica. That's what 6 months of investigation gets you. Complete knowledge. While you were thinking you were special, Michael was telling Melissa from his gym that she was the one who understood him. While you were planning your future together, he was sexting Rachel and promising her he'd leave his wife soon. You were never special. You were just convenient and naive enough to believe his lies. Why are you telling me this? Her voice had dropped to a whisper. Because I want you to understand exactly what you threw your career away for. A man who never intended to leave me, who was never faithful even to his mistresses, who saw you as a temporary diversion. You lost your job, your reputation, and your self-respect for someone who didn't even value you enough to be honest with you. I hung up before she could respond. There was no satisfaction in twisting the knife with Jessica. She was just collateral damage in Michael's pattern of destruction, but I wanted her to understand the full scope of what she'd participated in, to carry that knowledge forward into whatever life she managed to build from here. Tuesday brought news that Michael's company had opened a formal investigation into his conduct. The combination of Jessica's confession and the evidence I'd provided to HR had triggered a mandatory review process. Michael was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's conclusion. Without his salary and with his client base evaporating, his financial situation was rapidly deteriorating. My phone rang again, Michael this time, his voice desperate. Charlotte, please, you've made your point. I've lost Jessica. I'm losing my job. I'm about to lose my house. What more do you want? I want you to feel a fraction of what I felt when I discovered your betrayal, I said simply. I want you to understand what it's like to have everything you've built torn down by someone you trusted. And we're not done yet, Michael. Not even close. Wednesday morning brought the catastrophe Michael had been dreading. The company's investigation concluded with brutal efficiency, immediate termination for gross misconduct, violation of workplace ethics policies, and breach of fiduciary duty to the firm. His partnership stake, which he'd bragged would secure our retirement, was revoked. The buyout he'd expected was reduced to a fraction of its value due to the circumstances of his termination. I was having coffee at my mother's house when Rebecca called with the news. They didn't just fire him, they're considering whether to report him to the State Bar Association for ethics violations. Charlotte, you've effectively ended his legal career. Good, I said without hesitation. He ended my marriage without a second thought. He gets the same courtesy. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Jessica appeared at my mother's front door, looking haggard, her designer clothes replaced with jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt. My mother answered and immediately tried to close the door, but I stopped her. "Let her in," I said. "This should be interesting." Jessica sat across from me in my mother's living room, her hands twisted in her lap. "I need to tell you something about Michael." "If this is about more affairs, I already know about them." "No, it's not that." She took a shaky breath. "The money in his secret account, the $247.00 you knew about? That's not all of it. There's another account offshore in the Cayman Islands. He has close to 800 euros and dollars hidden there." I kept my expression neutral despite my racing pulse. "And you're telling me this why?" "Because he deserves everything you're doing to him and more. After you caught us, after I lost my job, he told me I was on my own, that he couldn't risk being seen with me anymore because it would hurt his divorce case. When I went to his apartment that night, begging him for help, for some kind of support since I lost my job because of him, you know what he said?" Her voice cracked. "He said I was always just a convenient fuck, that he'd never loved me, never planned to leave you, and I was stupid to think otherwise. How do you know about this account? I helped him set it up 6 months ago. He told me it was for our future, and made me complicit in hiding it. I have the account numbers, the transfer records, everything." She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots. I was going to keep quiet, try to blackmail him for enough money to restart my life, but then I realized he doesn't deserve protection. He deserves to lose everything just like I did. I studied her carefully. Jessica was broken, vindictive, but also offering me exactly what I needed to completely destroy Michael's financial security. The ethical implications of using information from his former mistress were complicated. But then again, Michael had complicated ethics first, when he decided to commit fraud by hiding assets during a divorce. "Send me everything you have," I said. "Screenshots, account numbers, transfer histories, everything." "What happens to me?" Jessica asked quietly. "Will you still destroy my reputation? That depends on how useful this information proves to be, and whether you testify if this goes to court." I leaned forward. "Michael turned on you the moment it was convenient. I can respect someone who returns the favor." She nodded and began forwarding files to my email. Within minutes, I had comprehensive documentation of an offshore account specifically designed to hide marital assets from divorce proceedings. This wasn't just adultery anymore. This was fraud. I called Rebecca immediately. Her reaction was swift and merciless. "This changes everything. We can file for an emergency injunction freezing all his accounts, including this offshore one. More importantly, hiding assets during divorce proceedings is a serious offense. We can use this to invalidate any claims he might make about the fairness of your settlement." "How fast can you move on this?" "I can have the paperwork filed by end of business today. By tomorrow morning, Michael won't be able to access any of his money without court approval." "And Charlotte?" Rebecca's voice held barely suppressed excitement. "If we can prove he was planning this asset concealment before you filed for divorce, this could constitute fraud. Criminal fraud." "Do it," I said. "All of it." Thursday arrived with Michael's entire financial world collapsing. The court had frozen all his accounts overnight, including the offshore account he'd believed was safely hidden. When he tried to withdraw cash from his regular checking account that morning, his card was declined. His credit card stopped working. He was functionally penniless until the court resolved the asset freeze. According to my GPS tracking, Michael went to his attorney's office and stayed there for 3 hours, undoubtedly learning exactly how bad his situation had become. He'd tried to play financial chess with someone who'd been documenting his every move for 6 months. He'd brought a knife to a gunfight. My phone exploded with calls from him, which I ignored. Text messages flooded in, evolving from angry accusations to desperate pleas. "This is insane. You can't freeze all my money. I need to live." "Charlotte, please. I'm sorry. I'll give you whatever you want. Just unfreeze the accounts." "You're destroying me over a mistake. Have some mercy." "I have no money for food, no money for gas. You're going to bankrupt me." I let him spiral for hours before finally responding with a single text. "You wanted to leave me with nothing while you lived comfortably with your hidden money. Now you understand how that feels. Welcome to consequences." That evening, I met with my financial advisor, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd been helping me restructure my assets independently of Michael. She'd opened new accounts in my name only, had helped me establish credit without Michael, and had been preparing me for financial independence throughout my investigation. "You're in an excellent position," Patricia explained, reviewing my portfolio. "The $200 from Michael's account gives you a solid foundation. Combined with your half of the house equity and the retirement accounts, you're looking at approximately $2 million in assets. Add in the offshore account if the court awards you a portion of that, and you could be close to $6 million. What about my photography business? That's the exciting part. You've been working on building your portfolio and client base quietly for 6 months. You have bookings for 3 weddings next month, 2 corporate events, and a contract with that boutique hotel for their promotional materials. Your business income is projected to hit $80,000 in the first year, growing to potentially $150,000 by year 3 as you build reputation." I'd been preparing for this new life systematically. While Michael had been planning his affair-fueled future, I'd been building an actual, sustainable independence. Every weekend, he'd claimed to be working while actually seeing Jessica. I'd been networking at photography events, updating my portfolio, and booking clients. The business I'd once pursued as a hobby, according to Michael and Jessica, was about to become my liberation. Friday brought the confrontation I'd been orchestrating all week. Michael had asked for an emergency meeting with our attorneys present to discuss resolution options. What he didn't know was that I'd been waiting for him to reach the breaking point where he'd be desperate enough to agree to my terms. We met in Rebecca's conference room, Michael looking haggard and defeated, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face drawn. His attorney, a man named Richard Sterling, who charged $600 an hour that Michael could no longer afford, looked equally exhausted. "My client would like to discuss a settlement," Richard began carefully. "The current situation is untenable. The frozen accounts have left him unable to meet basic living expenses." "Then he shouldn't have hidden assets during divorce proceedings," Rebecca replied crisply. "Our position hasn't changed. Mrs. Bennett is entitled to 50% of all marital assets, including the offshore account your client fraudulently concealed." "The offshore account was established before the divorce filing," Richard argued weakly. "But was being actively funded during the marriage with marital assets," Rebecca countered. "It was specifically designed to hide money from Mrs. Bennett. We have testimony from Ms. Jessica Thornton confirming this." Michael's head snapped up. "Jessica testified against me?" "She provided a detailed deposition yesterday," I said, speaking directly to him for the first time. "Explained how you convinced her to help you set up the account, how you told her it was for your future together while actually planning to cut her out. She was very thorough." "That bitch," Michael hissed. "Careful," I said coldly. "You're not in a position to insult anyone. You're broke, unemployed, under investigation by your professional licensing board, and facing potential criminal charges for fraud. Jessica's testimony might be the least of your problems." Richard held up a hand. "My client is willing to offer a settlement. He'll agree to a 60-40 split of all assets in Mrs. Bennett's favor, including the house and the retirement accounts. He'll also agree not to contest the divorce or request spousal support." "Not good enough," Rebecca said immediately. "Our position is 70-30, given the fraud and adultery. Mrs. Bennett also wants the house solely in her name, full access to Mr. Bennett's client list for her photography business, and he signs a non-compete agreement preventing him from practicing law in Illinois for 5 years. 5 years? That's career suicide," Richard protested. "Then he shouldn't have committed career suicide by sleeping with his subordinate and hiding assets," I replied. "These are my terms. He can accept them, or we can go to trial where I'll make sure every detail of his affairs, his fraud, and his professional misconduct becomes public record. I'll testify about the GPS tracking showing his lies, the secret credit cards, the multiple women. Every humiliating detail will be in the court transcripts, available to anyone who searches his name." Michael was pale, his hands trembling. "You'd really destroy me that completely?" "You tried to destroy me first. You just weren't smart enough to pull it off." I leaned forward across the conference table. "I gave you 9 years of my life, Michael. I supported your career, managed our home, sacrificed my own ambitions for your success, and you repaid me by lying, cheating, and planning to leave me destitute while you lived comfortably with your hidden money and your mistress. So yes, I will absolutely destroy you if you don't accept these terms." "I need time to think," Michael said weakly. You have until Monday morning, Rebecca stated. After that, we proceed to trial and Mrs. Bennett releases all documentation to the press. I believe the Chicago Tribune would be very interested in a story about a prominent attorney who committed fraud and workplace sexual harassment. The meeting ended with Michael slumped in his chair, the fight visibly draining from him. As we gathered our things to leave, he called my name. Charlotte, wait. Please. I paused at the door but didn't turn around. I'm sorry, I really am. I never meant for things to go this far. You meant every bit of it, Michael. You just didn't mean to get caught. I looked back at him over my shoulder. And you're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you're facing consequences. Walking out of that conference room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 6 months. Genuine peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction yet, but peace. The war wasn't over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Michael would accept my terms because he had no other choice. I'd systematically dismantled every avenue of escape, every potential advantage, every hidden resource. That weekend, I finally allowed myself to visit the house. Our house, my house. Michael was staying at a cheap extended stay hotel, having been locked out by the court order I'd secured. I walked through the rooms we'd shared, seeing them now as the prison I'd been living in without realizing it. In the bedroom, I found the lingerie I'd mentioned to Jessica, the set I'd bought for our anniversary that Michael had called trashy. I put it on and took a selfie, not for anyone else, but for myself. A reminder that I was still here, still standing, still powerful despite everything he'd tried to take from me. Monday morning arrived with Michael's surrender. His attorney called Rebecca to confirm that Michael would accept all terms of the settlement. The house would be mine. 70% of all assets would be mine. The offshore account would be split with me receiving the majority due to the fraud involved in its concealment. Michael would sign the non-compete agreement and leave the state to rebuild whatever career he could salvage elsewhere. He's broken, Rebecca told me after the call. Completely defeated. He asked if you would consider any mercy, any reduction in the terms. What did you tell him? I told him you'd already shown mercy by not pressing criminal charges for the fraud. He should count himself lucky he's not facing prison time. The divorce was finalized on November 14th, exactly 7 months and 30 days after I'd discovered that first text message. I attended the hearing alone, Michael having already signed the papers and fled to his brother's house in Arizona, unable to face the final dissolution in person. Judge Morrison, a woman in her 50s who'd clearly seen countless divorces, reviewed the settlement agreement with raised eyebrows. This is quite one-sided, but I see both parties have agreed to the terms. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Mrs. Bennett, are you satisfied with this arrangement? Completely, Your Honor. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I hereby grant this divorce decree. The marriage between Charlotte Bennett and Michael Bennett is dissolved. She brought down her gavel with a sharp crack that felt like liberation. Walking out of the courthouse, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Jessica. I heard about the settlement. Good for you. I'm moving to Portland starting over. Thanks for showing me who he really was before I wasted more of my life on him. I didn't respond. Jessica's journey was her own now, just as mine was my own. We'd both been casualties of Michael's selfishness, but we'd also both survived it. The day after the divorce was finalized, I changed every lock in the house, painted over the color schemes Michael had insisted on, and rearranged the furniture to eliminate any reminder of our shared life. The master bedroom became my photography studio. His office became a library filled with books I'd always wanted to read but never had time for. The living room where we'd entertained his colleagues became a gallery space for my work. I was hanging photos on the freshly painted walls when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Michael standing on the porch I now owned, looking diminished in ill-fitting clothes that suggested he'd lost significant weight. Against my better judgment, I opened the door but didn't invite him in. What do you want, Michael? I'm leaving for Arizona tomorrow, he said quietly. I wanted to say goodbye, and to apologize again. You've apologized. It doesn't change anything. I know, but I need you to understand that I did love you, Charlotte. Maybe not enough, maybe not the right way, but I did love you. No, you didn't. My voice was calm, matter of fact. You loved what I provided, a stable home, a supportive partner, someone to manage the details while you focused on your career. But you didn't love me as a person, because if you had, you wouldn't have been able to disrespect me the way you did. I made mistakes. You made choices. Every text message to Jessica was a choice. Every lie about where you were was a choice. Setting up that offshore account to hide money from me was a choice. You chose yourself over our marriage repeatedly for years. Those weren't mistakes, they were deliberate decisions. He looked down at his feet. I'm financially ruined. My career is over. I'm 42 years old and starting from scratch in a new state where nobody knows me. Good, I said simply. Maybe being stripped of everything will teach you something about consequences. Maybe it won't. Either way, it's not my concern anymore. You really hate me, don't you? I considered the question carefully. No, I don't hate you. Hatred requires emotional investment, and you're not worth my emotions anymore. What I feel is disappointment that I wasted 9 years on someone who turned out to be so ordinary, so predictable, so cliché, really. The husband having an affair with a younger coworker while his wife remains oblivious. It's the plot of a bad television movie. I guess I deserve that. You deserve worse. But life isn't always fair, and sometimes people get away with being terrible. You're just lucky you got caught by someone who chose legal revenge instead of something more violent. He flinched at that. Would you have really destroyed me completely if I hadn't accepted the settlement? Michael, I did destroy you completely. You lost your career, your reputation, your financial security, your home, and your future. The only thing you kept was your freedom. And that's just because I decided prison was too merciful. I wanted you to live with the consequences, not escape into incarceration where you could play the victim. Jessica told me you were the one who convinced her to testify against me. Jessica testified because you treated her the same way you treated me, as disposable once she was no longer useful. I simply gave her the opportunity to make you face consequences. She took it because you earned her contempt, just like you earned mine. I heard she's moving to Portland. Good for her. I hope she builds a better life than the one she would have had with you. Michael stood there for another moment, seemingly searching for words that might change something, might earn him some small measure of forgiveness or understanding. But I had none to give. He'd burned that bridge himself, systematically and thoroughly. Goodbye, Charlotte, he finally said. Goodbye, Michael. I closed the door before he'd even turned away, not interested in watching him walk to whatever cheap car he was driving now that his BMW had been sold to help pay the settlement. Through the window, I watched him drive away, and I felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, no satisfaction, just a profound sense of closure. The Michael chapter of my life was finished, and the Charlotte chapter was beginning. 3 months later, my photography business had exceeded even Patricia's optimistic projections. The boutique hotel contract had led to referrals from other high-end establishments. My wedding photography had gained a reputation for capturing genuine emotion rather than staged poses, and I was booking out 6 months in advance. I'd hired an assistant, a recent art school graduate named Maya who was enthusiastic and talented. The house had become truly mine, every room reflecting my taste and personality rather than compromises made for someone else's preferences. I'd started hosting monthly dinner parties with friends who'd supported me through the divorce, women who understood what it meant to rebuild yourself after betrayal. One evening, as I was editing photos from a wedding I'd shot that weekend, my phone rang with a number I vaguely recognized. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Charlotte? It's Patricia Morrison, the CEO whose business I'd helped her remove from Michael's client list. I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all. How can I help you? I wanted to let you know that your instinct about Michael was right. After we terminated our relationship with his firm and hired new counsel, our new attorneys discovered several irregularities in how Michael had been handling our account. Overbilling, unnecessary legal work, that sort of thing. We're considering whether to file a complaint with the Bar Association. I appreciate you telling me. There's something else. I'm on the board of the Downtown Business Association, and we're planning our annual fundraising gala. We need a photographer who can capture not just the event, but the personalities involved, the human stories behind the business suits. Your name came up, and after seeing your portfolio, I'd like to offer you the contract. It would be high-profile exposure, and the compensation is $15 for the evening. I felt a surge of satisfaction. This was the kind of contract that established careers, that led to more prestigious work. and it had come through a connection I'd made by protecting myself from Michael's deception. "I'd be honored," I said. "Send over the details, and I'll make sure it's my best work." After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back deck I'd had renovated, looking at the garden I'd planted myself in the early spring. The tulips were gone now, replaced by summer roses and herbs I used for cooking. Everything growing, everything new, everything mine. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Dinner Sunday? I'm making your favorite pot roast." I smiled and replied, "I'll be there. I'll bring dessert." This was the life I'd built from the ashes of my marriage. Not a life of revenge, though revenge had been necessary to clear the ground, but a life of deliberate choices, of pursuing my own dreams, of surrounding myself with people who respected rather than diminished me. 6 months after the divorce, I received an unexpected email from Jessica. The subject line read, "You were right. Charlotte, I know we're not friends and probably never will be, but I wanted to thank you. Moving to Portland was the best decision I ever made. I'm working at a nonprofit, doing communications work that actually matters. I'm in therapy, dealing with why I thought being the other woman was somehow romantic instead of pathetic. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, that I wanted the results without putting in the work. You were right. I saw your life with Michael and thought it looked easy, comfortable. I didn't see the sacrifices you made, the support you provided, the foundation you built that made his success possible. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I did, and I'm committed to being better, to earning things myself instead of trying to take them from others. I hope your photography business is thriving. I saw some of your work online, and it's beautiful. You have real talent, and I'm glad you're finally getting to pursue it without someone telling you it's just a hobby. Take care, Jessica." I read the email twice, then closed it without responding. Jessica's journey toward self-awareness was admirable, but it wasn't my responsibility to validate or acknowledge it. She'd have to live with her choices, just as Michael lived with his, just as I lived with mine. The difference was that my choices had been about building rather than destroying, about claiming my own power rather than trying to take someone else's. And that difference made all the difference in the world. 1 year after the divorce, I stood in a downtown Chicago gallery hosting my first solo exhibition. The walls were covered with photographs I'd taken over the past 12 months, images that documented not just my subjects, but my own journey from devastation to reconstruction. The title of the exhibition was Rebuilt, and it featured before and after photographs of buildings being renovated, people recovering from hardship, gardens growing from scorched earth. The opening night drew a larger crowd than I'd anticipated. Patricia Morrison was there with several members of the Downtown Business Association. My mother stood in the corner, tears of pride streaming down her face. Maya, my assistant, handled the guest book and directed people to their favorite pieces. And to my surprise, several of Michael's former colleagues attended, people who'd heard the story of what happened and respected how I'd handled it. "These are extraordinary," a woman in an elegant black dress said, studying a photograph of a building mid-renovation, half destroyed and half restored. "There's such power in the contrast." "Thank you," I replied. "It's about transformation, how we rebuild ourselves after destruction, how we become something different and often stronger than what we were before." "Is this autobiographical?" she asked knowingly. "All art is in some way." She introduced herself as Catherine Walsh, a curator for one of Chicago's prestigious museums. "We're planning an exhibition on resilience in modern life, documentary photography showing real stories of recovery and transformation. Would you be interested in being featured?" My career had reached a level I'd only dreamed about when I was sublimating my ambitions to support Michael's. The irony wasn't lost on me. His betrayal had freed me to achieve more than I ever could have while yoked to his needs. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, I walked through the gallery alone, looking at my own work with fresh eyes. Each photograph represented a choice to move forward, to create rather than destroy, to build something meaningful from the rubble of my broken marriage. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown Arizona number. "I saw an article about your exhibition. Congratulations. You deserve the success. M." I deleted the message without responding. Michael's acknowledgement meant nothing now. He was a chapter that had closed, a lesson I'd learned, a person I'd once known who no longer had any claim on my attention or emotions. 2 years after the divorce, I'd expanded my business to include a small studio space where I taught photography workshops for women rebuilding their lives after divorce or other hardship. Once a month, I hosted free sessions for women from local domestic violence shelters, teaching them to see beauty again, to frame their own narratives, to capture evidence of their survival. This is about more than photography, I told a group of 8 women one Saturday morning, all of them at various stages of leaving abusive relationships. It's about learning to see yourself as more than what was done to you. It's about documenting your own resilience. One woman, Sarah, raised her hand tentatively. How did you move past the anger? Everyone tells me I need to forgive to heal, but I don't want to forgive. Does that make me a bad person? No, I said firmly. Forgiveness isn't mandatory for healing. What's mandatory is refusing to let what happened define your future. I never forgave my ex-husband, and I never will. What he did was unforgivable. But I also don't waste my energy hating him anymore. I've simply moved forward without him. But don't you feel bitter? Another woman asked. Sometimes, I admitted, but mostly I feel grateful. Grateful that I discovered who he really was before I wasted more years. Grateful that his betrayal pushed me to build the life I actually wanted instead of the life I thought I should want. Grateful that I'm strong enough to have survived and thrived. The workshops became some of my most meaningful work, watching women who'd been broken by betrayal gradually find their strength again through the lens of a camera. Each photograph they took was evidence of their survival, proof that they could frame their own narrative instead of accepting the one imposed on them by their abusers. 3 years after the divorce, I'd published a photography book called Aftermath: Stories of Reconstruction. It featured interviews with dozens of women who'd rebuilt their lives after betrayal, divorce, or abandonment, accompanied by powerful portraits I'd taken of them in settings they'd chosen to represent their transformation. The book received critical acclaim and became a bestseller in its category. I was invited to speak at conferences about women's empowerment, asked to give interviews about resilience and recovery. My story, the carefully orchestrated exposure of Michael's betrayal and my methodical dismantling of his advantages, became a symbol for women who'd been told they should accept betrayal quietly. You're kind of a hero to a lot of women, Maya told me one afternoon as we reviewed photo edits together. The way you refused to be a victim, how you took control of the situation. I'm not a hero, I corrected gently. I'm just someone who refused to let someone else write my ending. There's a difference. Still, you inspired a lot of people to stand up for themselves. That I could accept. If my experience helped even one woman understand that she didn't have to accept betrayal passively, that she had the power to demand consequences and rebuild on her own terms, then perhaps something good had come from the worst experience of my life. 4 years after the divorce, I received unexpected news. Michael had remarried. His new wife was a paralegal from Phoenix, someone he'd met while trying to rebuild his legal career in Arizona. According to the brief message from his brother Mark, who'd remained friendly with me despite everything, Michael was trying to be better this time. I felt nothing upon hearing the news. No jealousy, no satisfaction, no curiosity. Michael's life had ceased to be relevant to mine the moment our divorce was finalized. Whether he'd learned from his mistakes or was simply repeating the same patterns with a new victim wasn't my concern. Do you ever wonder if he changed? My mother asked when I told her about Michael's remarriage during our weekly dinner. No, I said honestly, because it doesn't matter to me whether he did or didn't. His character development isn't my responsibility or my concern. I hope for his new wife's sake that he's better, but I don't waste any mental energy thinking about it. You've really moved on, my mother observed with satisfaction. I moved on 3.5 years ago. Everything since then has been moving forward. 5 years after the divorce, I stood in a different gallery for a different opening. This time, it was a retrospective of my career, spanning from my early work to my most recent projects. The exhibition was titled Charlotte Bennett, 5 Years of Vision, and it represented half a decade of building a career, a life, and an identity completely separate from the woman I'd been when married to Michael. The gallery was packed with friends, colleagues, students from my workshops, and media representatives. Catherine Walsh from the museum was there, as was Patricia Morrison. Maya, who'd become not just my assistant but a close friend, had her own photographs displayed in a side room, emerging artists who'd been mentored by me. "I'm so proud of you," my mother whispered, squeezing my hand as we stood together, looking at a photograph I'd taken of myself exactly 5 years earlier. In it, I stood in front of our former house, the one that was now entirely mine, looking directly at the camera with an expression of determination and power. The caption read, "Day 1. "I'm proud of me too," I admitted, not for what happened with Michael, but for what I built after. As the evening progressed, a journalist from a women's magazine approached me for an interview. "Your story has resonated with so many women," she began. "The way you handled your divorce has been called everything from empowering to vindictive. What would you say to critics who think you went too far?" "I'd say they've never been betrayed by someone they trusted completely," I replied. "I'd say they've never had to discover that years of their life were built on lies. I didn't go too far. I went exactly far enough to ensure I could rebuild without being haunted by someone who'd tried to destroy me. Some people argue that revenge doesn't lead to healing. I didn't seek revenge. I sought justice and accountability. There's a difference. Revenge would have been slashing his tires or posting his infidelity on social media. What I did was ensure he faced legal and professional consequences for his actions. That's not revenge. That's the natural result of his choices. And you have no regrets? Not one. Every action I took was measured, legal, and appropriate to the circumstances. I protected myself financially, professionally, and emotionally. If that makes me vindictive in some people's eyes, I can live with that assessment. I'd rather be called vindictive than be a doormat. The interview would appear in the magazine's next issue, another chapter in the narrative that had become part of my public identity. But the truth was, I rarely thought about Michael or what had happened anymore. That part of my life had become simply backstory, context for the person I'd become, rather than the defining event of my existence. That night, after the gallery closed and the guests departed, I sat alone among my photographs, drinking champagne and reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. 5 years ago, I'd been a woman whose life had shattered when she discovered her husband's betrayal. Today, I was a successful photographer, business owner, teacher, and published author. I'd rebuilt myself into something stronger, more authentic, and infinitely more satisfied than the person I'd been in my marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, one of my workshop students who'd left an abusive marriage 2 years ago. "Saw your exhibition tonight. You saved my life by teaching me I could rebuild mine. Thank you for showing me how." That message meant more than any critical acclaim, any bestseller status, any professional achievement, because ultimately, the most meaningful legacy of what had happened wasn't my personal success. It was demonstrating to other women that betrayal didn't have to be the end of their stories. It could be the beginning of something better. I raised my champagne glass in a silent toast to the Charlotte who'd opened her door to find Jessica standing there 5 years ago. The Charlotte who'd had the courage to set the trap and spring it. The Charlotte who'd refused to be a victim. That Charlotte had saved me, and in doing so, had saved countless other women who saw their own potential for strength in my story. The roses I'd planted in my garden 5 years ago were blooming in magnificent profusion now, their roots deep and strong in soil that had once seemed too damaged to support new growth. I was like those roses, planted in aftermath, nourished by determination, growing toward light that I'd claimed for myself. Michael had tried to write my ending as the discarded wife, the woman too blind to see what was happening, too weak to demand better. Instead, I'd written my own story, one where the woman who was betrayed didn't just survive but thrived, building a life so much richer than anything she could have achieved while shackled to someone who saw her as convenient rather than essential. This was victory, not the vindictive, hollow victory of destroying an enemy, but the profound victory of becoming someone better than I'd been before the crisis. Someone stronger, more independent, more authentic. Someone who knew her own worth and refused to settle for less than she deserved. As I locked up the gallery and drove home to the house that was entirely mine, I felt complete. Not because I'd gotten revenge on Michael, though that had been satisfying in its own way, but because I'd transformed betrayal into growth, pain into purpose, and destruction into creation. The lights were on when I arrived home, courtesy of the timer I'd set. The house welcomed me with warmth, with beauty, with the tangible evidence of the life I'd built with my own hands and my own choices. This was home. This was success. This was the epilogue Michael had tried to prevent me from writing, and it was perfect.